I wasn't planning on making a video today. I actually had today set aside just to play Resident Evil Requiem, but I've been noticing some things about the graphics that I think is worth bringing to your attention after my big benchmarking video yesterday. So you can probably see it right now. The depth of field effect in this game is probably one you should turn off. Now, do you see all of this weird, crazy aliasing that's happening back here where the depth of field effect is currently happening? Again, I've been staring at this like post in front of me to get that to happen. See, if we move out here and we don't have the depth of field effect, things look a lot more clear. However, again, as soon as I focus in on this, you can see that things go absolutely crazy aliased with that depth of field. Now, I will say that my initial thought was maybe it's just because I'm upscaling. Here I'm on 4K output, but using DLSS performance. However, even if I turn DLSS upscaling completely off, so it's just going to use the game's native TAA, it still doesn't look good. Now, it has less aliasing at native resolution with the native TAA than it does when using DLSS performance. So I will say that, if you do like the depth of field effect, especially in cinematics, where I think it can add a lot, and you want to try to keep it on, maybe try not to use resolution scaling. This game actually performs pretty well at native resolution if you're not using ray tracing on a lot of hardware. So you might, unlike a lot of games, like honestly, my default in most games these days is to turn on upscaling with DLSS, but in this game might consider the native. However, again, there's still a lot more aliasing here than I would like. So that would be one of my first recommendations, is even if you're having decent performance in this game, so you weren't maybe searching out optimized settings, you might want to consider turning off the depth of field if you're like me and finding that incredibly immersion breaking as you're playing the game. Notice that's with the depth of field off in the same scene, and everything looks nice and stable. Now, I do have some other complaints about the game that I don't necessarily have fixes for, and then some other thoughts. But the next complaint I have is that there's film grain that there doesn't seem to be any way to remove other than mods, but there's no official way. Even if you modify the config file, it doesn't seem like turning off the film grain there actually works. I don't know how much this comes through a YouTube video, because sometimes film grain in a YouTube video just ends up looking like YouTube compression artifacts. But yeah, there is a lot of film grain, and I wish we just had the option to turn it off for people who don't want that. And then another thing that I hope that there's some way that they could work on is, and by the way, I know I sound like I'm nitpicking here, but overall, and watch my big benchmarking video, I'm really happy with the visual to performance ratio in this game. I think you get a lot of good visuals, and especially when you're not using ray tracing, the performance is very high. The ray tracing can add something, but you don't have to use it. The game looks great without it. Right now, I have no ray tracing on, and things still look great. You still get, the dynamic, shadows and flashlights and everything still works pretty well. This is with the ray tracing off, but otherwise maxed out settings, other than I've just now turned off the depth of field. But again, I'm at nearly max settings right now, and I think that when you view items, which you actually collect constantly throughout the game, you use them throughout the game and you pick them up, you solve puzzles, I think that their item viewing mode, however they're choosing to do this, needs improvement. Again, I'm at nearly max settings at native 4K resolution right now, and I don't think that this object looks acceptably anti-aliased. Do you see that? So that's one thing. Find some way of applying anti-aliasing to these items when you're viewing them up close through the inventory or when you pick them up during gameplay. Because, yeah, with everything else looking so good, this really stands out as particularly bad. So I'm hoping Capcom is able to do something about that. Because that, other than the depth of field, which again, hopefully there could be some sort of fix for, this is my other biggest complaint visual quality-wise. Now, I do have some other minor nitpicks, and that's more regarding the path tracing situation. Now, I understand that talking about path tracing is now going to be alienating to a lot of users who don't have a path tracing capable hardware. That's fine. But what I'm actually going to say is I almost want to use the path tracing mode, but I've been finding myself turning it off. So when I'm in the path tracing mode, I find some of the graphics to be distractingly kind of distorted, I think boiling is a good way to put it for the... man, I don't know how much this is going to come through the YouTube compression. Let's go ahead and take a look. So... also, I think when I switched to this, it also kicked on upscaling and frame generation and all of that. I wanted to be locked to VSync right now, so I'm going to turn off the frame gen. Why do I want to be locked to VSync? Because I'm filming a YouTube video at 60 FPS, so it's going to look best for you if it's locked to 60. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the frame gen off. I think that'll keep us locked to 60 again. Okay, now I don't know how much this is going to come through YouTube compression, but as I just stand here right now, and I look at just kind of like the stairs or really anything, just like fix your eye on one of the pillars or the stairs or the desk in front of me. And I don't know if you'll notice it through YouTube compression, but I just notice a little bit of boiling. And especially with the film grain effect also there, I just don't like it. It looks a little bit unstable. Now, there's a lot of things about the path tracing mode that I do think look significantly better than the non-path trace modes. The reflections are one thing. Another thing is, if I switch the camera to third person here, the actual character's face, can I actually get the character to face the camera here? I don't know if I can. But I think the character itself, I don't know if I can get it when not in... a cutscene here. Oh, well. I think the character looks a lot nicer in the path tracing mode than in the non-path traced modes. But yeah, I just find a lot more visual noise happening in the path tracing mode compared to the non-path trace mode, to the point that I find it distracting enough that despite having a 5090, so I am able to handle the path tracing, I've been kind of turning it off a lot of the time anyway. Let's go ahead and switch to no ray tracing at all. Load back in, again, with the character model showing. And really, the game still looks quite good without any ray tracing at all. So if you've been feeling kind of missing out because maybe you didn't have the performance or hardware for path tracing, really, the game still looks quite good without it. And I actually find there to be less of that boiling noise. There's still the film grain, which is obnoxious, but I don't see as much of the boiling noise to the image that I see with the path tracing mode. Now, there's also just the ray tracing modes is kind of in between. But the last thing I want to mention about the if you are going to play with the ray tracing off is I would like you to at least consider turning off screen space reflections. I'll show you what I mean. I think this would work best if I start a new game so we can see the water reflections at the very beginning. Because the biggest downside, I think, to not using the high levels of ray tracing is in the reflections. But if you turn off screen space reflections, I think they're less distracting than when you actually have the screen space reflections on. So when you're not ray tracing, I do find that there's a lot of kind of breakup and noise and pixelation and things in those puddles and all that. Let me make sure I'm at native resolution when I'm doing this, because I do want to test it out at native res, so we're not looking at upscaling artifacts, we're looking at just the actual graphics themselves. Okay. So I find that sometimes the reflections with the screen space reflections can be a bit distractingly artifacty when in the non-ray traced modes. But if we go ahead and turn off screen space reflections, which I think I can do without going to the menu, it just uses cube maps. And the cube maps, while they don't try to reflect as much detail, I find that what they do reflect doesn't seem to be very artifact ridden. And you do still get reflections. Like I can still see that there's, color reflected from the signs up there and all of that. And this is without screen space reflections at all. So that's kind of my last tip here is if you're going to play with ray tracing completely off, I would actually highly suggest trying out disabling screen space reflections. And I think that just running off the cube maps works nicer. I found this to be the case in previous Resident Evil games as well, where where I would usually turn off the screen space reflections for artifact reasons, and the cube maps actually still give you some reflections, and they're not as distracting. And again, the game still looks quite good here just in the rasterized mode. The character's face is really the one big downside that we can see here. I think that the in the path tracing mode, the lighting and self-shadowing and I'll show you. We'll switch back to the path tracing mode one more time, and that's going to be the biggest reason why I've really been having trouble deciding whether I want to go with the path tracing mode or not, because that's it makes a really big difference on the character's face. Let's go ahead and load this back up. The other thing I'll mention too, though, in this game is this game also is very responsive. Like, it has pretty low latency. So I do think that frame generation is more usable here than it is in a lot of games. But anyway, let me show you here real quick, though. Do you notice how much better the character's face looks with the path tracing? So yeah, in the ray tracing off mode, that's the biggest problem I have with it, is just that the character herself is just not quite the same. So path tracing really helps the look of the character. However, usually when I'm actually playing, especially the game defaults to playing in first-person mode for Grace, and then switching to third-person for Leon. Anyway, so yeah, it's been hard to decide exactly how I want to play this. I know for a lot of people, the path tracing mode's not even one to consider. But yeah, the boiling has been a bit of an issue for it with me. And like I said, my last thought was really just the frame generation I've actually found to be pretty usable in this game. I haven't noticed a lot of artifacts, and the overall responsiveness of this game, every game has different amounts of latency. This game is pretty low latency, so kicking on frame gen hasn't been as bad for me as it is in a lot of games. I think I've been preferring playing with frame gen on in this game, whereas in most games, I'm usually a frame gen off kind of a person. So anyway, that's my thoughts on not exactly optimized settings, but I really do think for most people with modern hardware, if you just need performance, just turn the ray tracing off. And I think on most modern hardware, it's going to do pretty well. Obviously, you can turn things down from there, though. And then, yeah, consider screen space reflections off. Anyway, depth of field, very artifacty. I recommend turning that off. And that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope all of you have an excellent day.